After doing an AJAX call with fetch and ES6 promises in the last lecture, let's now use AsyncAwait to consume the promises in an easier way. So what we're interested in here is to create an asynchronous version of this same function that we did in the last lecture. So let's call this one here async function getWeather, and then AW for AsyncAwait, and again the war on earth ID. Okay, and then let's also call it just like we did here for the first one. Now, how do we do the code here using AsyncAwait? Well, it's actually not hard at all. So let's first of all copy this line of code here because it's going to be the same. And so this is the one that actually fetches the data. Now with AsyncAwait, remember we don't use then and catch, but instead we use await. So we create a new variable, const result, and then await the fetch. So the fetch will then get the data from the server while the execution here in this function stops, and then once it's done, so once the promise is fulfilled, it will then assign the result of this promise here to this variable. Okay, and that's it. So the execution stops here and then it goes to the next line. And so what we want to do now is just like we did before, is to then create this to JSON using the .json method. Okay, and that's also very simple because it is also a promise. And so we are simply going to await it. So again, let me call it data here and await the result .json. Okay, does that make sense? And finally, we will just log it to the console. Let's actually remove this logging here from this one so that we only end up with the strings. And here we go. So these are our two results for both London and San Francisco. Great. So once again, this is working, this time with AsyncAwait. So in a much easier way, I think, than what we had up here. Okay. Once again, because it looks like it is synchronous code, while in reality it's not. All that really happens is that the function is called, and then in the background it runs all of this code that we have here. And so it's okay that the code stops here with the await expression, because this entire function here is running in the background anyway, and so it's not blocking the main thread that's running in the JavaScript engine. Okay, and so here we have our two sequential promises, which are both awaited. First this one, and then this one, and finally we log it to the console. Now let's do something similar to this one here. So just that we end up with a similar structure. And so, yeah, let's log it. And so we are sure that everything works the same. And so you see that for London, it's the same. For San Francisco, it's the same. Now let's just change it a bit to, we actually want it to tomorrow. And so we need the second element of this weather array. So let's add it here to the also tomorrow. And then up here we can say temperatures today. Take a look at it. And oh, okay, here we have an error now. And actually that's a good time for showing you how to handle errors with AsyncAwait. So remember that I told you before that in order to handle errors with AsyncAwait, we cannot use, of course, this catch method. But instead we use something else. And I told you I would show it to you later. And so now let me do that. And so this has actually nothing to do with AsyncAwait, but it's just something that is available to us in JavaScript, which is called try catch. So let me just show you how it works, and then I explain it to you afterwards. So we basically wrap all our code into a try statement. And so this code here will all get executed, but if there is an error, then it will be catched. And so we add this catch statement here, and then we say what we want to happen when there is an error. And so let's once more just log the error to the console. Okay, so This is called the try catch statement again. And so it tries to execute this code, but if there is an error, then it will jump here to this part. And so let's try what happens now. Okay, and so now it doesn't really throw these errors, so it's not red like it was before, but it simply logged these to the console like this. And we can also say alert instead of logging it, and so that will like create this window. Okay, and so now you see here the today is not defined, and you don't see the error here in the console at all. Okay, and so we catch that error here with this part of the catch statement. Okay, now let's actually fix this error that we had here, because it's of course not today, but tomorrow. And so let's see what happens now. And all right, so we have the weather for San Francisco both today and tomorrow, and the same for London. And it doesn't really appear in the same order here. So we called San Francisco first and London second, but for some reason the data for London came back first, and only then San Francisco came back. And so that's why it then happens here in this order. But that's not a problem at all. That's just a good proof that actually this function here runs in the background, okay? And so the results do not appear in the order that they were called, so that they are here in the code. Okay, so this is just working just fine. Now, a final thing is that I want to show you is that we want to return some data from this function. And you already know that an async function always returns a promise. And so let's use that. So let's return the entire data here. And so you already know that what we return from an async function will be the resolved value of the promise that this function here returns, right? So that's what we talked about in the last AsyncAwait lecture. And so let's pretend that we want to actually store this data for this London. And let me show you how it's not going to work. So data London get weather AW. And then let's try to log it to the console. Data London. Okay, and again, this is not going to work. And I want you to think why it doesn't work. And so you already see the result here. So again, it says just the promise here and not really the result that we wanted. And that's again because this console.log statement here happens way before this data actually comes back. And so we run this function at a time where we don't already have that data. Now, if we want this to really work, then we need to use the then method in order to handle the result value of this promise, right? So let's actually do it the other way around. So we need to declare this at a variable that is not constant. And so for that we use let, remember? And we can then very simply handle the result of the promise. So data. And now we can say that we want data London to be equal to the data that came back. Right? So what will happen now? Let's take a look. And well, of course, it still didn't work because it's now undefined, because this here, of course, still happens only after this console log here finished running. So if we wanted to really log it, then I guess we would have to make a bigger function here. All right, and so now it is going to work. So that's the data for London here. So does it make sense? Again, this is because this async function here returns a promise, right? And the data that we return from this async function will be the resolved value of that promise. And so we can have access to it by using the then method on this promise here, right? Then we can log it like we did here, and then of course play around with the data as we wish. All right, so this is actually something that we're going to use later in the project. And it's also important to notice here for your own projects in the future. And so, yeah, I wanted to really show you how this works once again. And so now we did Ajax calls using both promises and AsyncAwait. And so you're now ready to start working on the big project that's coming up right in the next section. So I hope to see you there really soon.